Identity podcast. I am joined today by a wonderful human being, Marie Broadway. Hi, Marie.
Hello. I'm happy to be here. Hi, everyone.
Yay. If it's all right with you, I'm going to read a little bit of your bio and then you can, and then so people know who is this human that is sitting with Kimberly's. Okay, I do this now. Ever since Marie was young, Marie had an active imagination. Marie spent a lot of time as a kid playing pretend, making art, and scribbling stories into notebooks. Marie still does all of those things today and has dedicated their life to creative pursuits and know intimately the struggle of bringing them to life. When Marie pursued an education and career in drama therapy, more of those pieces fell into place. Through play, Marie was able to see the creative process externalized. It became necessary for Marie to confront difficult patterns in order to relate to them in new ways. The drama therapy modality of developmental transformations is a tool that helps Marie recognize and integrate past experiences so that Marie can develop an honest and compassionate relationship with themselves and with their creative goals, and now helps others to develop that relationship to themselves and their creative goals. Marie is a certified practitioner in the drama therapy modality of developmental transformations, which Marie has practiced since 2016, using the imaginative play practice in their work as an artist, a writer, and a creative coach. Marie, does that feel like that's like how you're entering into this space of who you are right now in this world?
Yeah, I guess it does. Yes. Well, I guess I can just add to it, which is just to say, I'm an artist and a writer, and I have been both of those things for a very long time. And in the past, I guess 10 years now, I have been also very involved in the drama therapy community and using DBT specifically, which I am thinking that maybe people know a little bit about, since I don't know if you talk about it much
Probably
on this podcast,
not.
But okay,
yes,
well, it's how Kim and I know each other. It's how we know each other through DBT training, and basically using this like emergent play process to explore inner themes and stories, and now I use that in creativity coaching with folks working on all sorts of things related to creative process.
Yes.
Yeah.
So developmental transformations is a practice that it started as a therapeutic process, but it has evolved a lot. The fact that you use it in creative coaching, it's also used in social change work. It's used as performance. It's used as, a lot of different ways. If you could sum up I guess we should start with what is developmental transformations, because people are like, so like if you could sum it up in like a few words to you, what is DBT?
Well, I use it as a tool. I think it's such a powerful, it's really just play. So it's like, if you can think back to like as being a kid and playing, it's sort of a structured play space I use it with adults, so you can use it with kids too, I think. I don't know. I'm not really here to talk about DBT specifically, but
I figured we lay a little bit of the foundation of some of the things we're talking about.
DBT is like an emergent, embodied play structure it's like a drama therapy modality. It tunes into the body. It follows different impulses of what you want your body to do without knowing really what it means yet. You make that into shapes. It turns into stories. And almost always, in my experience, those stories reflect something of your history or patterns that you've been grappling with for a very long time. So they can be very related to your past, and they can also be very related to your dreams and your future and what you are thinking about and how you integrate all of those things.
I co-sign on that. I always like to ask folks who practice DBT to describe it from their perspective, because it's always
Yeah.
a little bit different. It's
Yeah.
always just like colored with the human that's talking.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, I think about how I describe DVT to people, and I always struggle. So I'm always like, well, you know, it's uh it's a drama therapy and improvisational and relational, and we're in our bodies and we listen to them and
I like we're in our bodies and we listen to them.
yeah. So the fact that you use DVT in creative work, so
Yeah.
this podcast is really centralizing around the topic of creativity and the whole creative process, because you are a creative coach. So talk to us a little bit about what is creativity to you.
Yeah, so I was actually just thinking about this right before I came on. I was like, am I gonna have to define creativity? But then I went to my website and I was like, oh, I defined it here. Great.
Past me, win.
Yeah. Thanks, Past Marie. So I actually do have a line on there that I still really love, which is that I think creativity is anything we do in active engagement with our imagination.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my line and I'm sticking to it.
I love it. I love it.
But yeah, broadly, I think it connects to so many things. And, you know, it could be work related, it could be not work related. I think I personally have the experience of creativity being connected to a lot of personal projects and like art and writing, fiction writing, storytelling. I think therapy is a creative process. You know, this like practice of making sense of your life and integrating different stories and, you know, restorying.
Yeah.
And I also work with I've worked a lot with new parents. Parenting, I think, is such a creative process.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Becoming a parent is a creative process. So there's a lot of like overlaps, I think. And like, spiritual integration is such a creative process also. These are just things that I feel drawn to and have like worked with people on. So it's like it can touch so many different parts of our lives.
Marie and I, so we had a meeting to talk about like, okay, well, what do we want to talk about? But then like, how are both of us coming into the conversation? And so I shared with Marie, like, oh, I have a fascination with neuroscience, and I've never gone to the depths of understanding neuroscience of creativity. So I was like, is it cool if I bring in like some of those pieces? And gratefully, Marie was like, yeah, yes.
Heck yeah.
So I'm going to weave in some things about the neuroscience of creativity, at least from like when the folks are like doing the studies, right? I found it interesting. The more I read about the neuroscience of creativity, there's certain parts of like studies around creativity they can't like replicate because the creative process is so individual, and the creative process is so individual to the human creating that they can't replicate it.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing.
Right?
I love that. That makes total sense to me because I think everyone has their own really specific creative process and how they get into it and what they make when they're in it. And so that checks
Crazy.
out.
Yeah, that's
So then you're saying that it's hard for them to make like do a study on some replicating a specific type of creativity or something like that.
Or if there's like a component of creativity that they're wanting to like research. Some of them are able to be repeated because of the process. It tends to be the same. And then other pieces of the process, they're like, how would we do that? So like how like the research defines creativity. And I want to ask you what your thoughts on this are. It says, what is creativity? It involves generating an idea that is new in some way. And it's the primary defining attribute to creativity. For it is to be considered creative, it must be novel, new, original, unique, unusual, rare, infrequent, but also relevant, fit for circumstances, and appropriate. So it's like this Venn diagram of what is original and what is appropriate, and creative's like right smack dab in the middle. And I was like, I could fuck with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's a cool, I haven't heard that definition before, and that's a cool one to kind of chew on, because I was like, the novel part, I was like, oh yeah, I guess it is kind of novel, because that's what gets us excited. It's like, oh, we're like doing something in a slight, because, oh, and also it's actually, I feel like you need to say this when you're talking about novel, because I think sometimes like collectively we're like, novel is something totally new. It's like something I've never done before. It doesn't, even, it's not even familiar in any way. But actually, and this is something we know through DBT, but I actually think it's so important to define novel as it could be just slightly new. Like, it could be something that's totally familiar, but you're doing it in a slightly different way.
Yes.
Or just noticing like the novelty. Because I think that muscle, like to build that muscle of like understanding there's novelty even in a day-to-day monotony is hugely helpful to the creative process, because to create so many types of things, it actually requires a monotonous repetition. Like, it requires repetition also. So I think to just say that creativity is something novel is actually missing a whole other piece, which is that it actually also requires repetition, but that there's novelty in that. It's like that we need both,
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that you said that, because it's the repeating elements that create the structures of like, okay, this is what we're kind of playing with.
Yeah.
This is what we're working with. But it's those non-repeating elements that like sneak.
Yeah.
So like back when Marie and I were in training, I don't know. There was a point where I realized like, oh, I love non-repeating elements. I love them. And I just couldn't define why. And I remember our trainer, Renee, being like, that might be something to think about, Kim. Because, so many patterns and like pattern recognition of what meaning does that have for you? And I was like, I don't know. I was like in the dark. I was like, whatever. But like now I look back at that, there's lots of psychological reasons, but also, avoidance. But also in the fact that like, that's also where a lot of creative spark lives. Like in the non-repeating element.
Yeah, totally. It's what gets you excited. You're like, oh, more of this. Or like, what is this? If it's new, you're like, what is this? Let me explore it a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the what is this that gets my heart beating a little faster.
Yeah. And I also love, actually, just to go back to that definition you were reading, there's something about the relevance that also made me think, of course, because, and you can also define relevance in any way, but like when we're like talking about the creative things we want to do with our lives, they often are deeply personally relevant to us in some way, right? Like, it's like, oh, I've always loved like food, and like I've always like food's been always really important to me, or like I have an experience of like not like not being nourished in the way that I needed to, and then like someone goes off and like it becomes a chef, or like it's like that becomes deeply relevant to their story, and it's creative in that sense too, because they're like filling a need that they didn't have met, or like, I think that happens a lot in like this kind of work, where it's like, how is the thing that you're pursuing creatively relevant to your life and relevant to your story?
So I didn't think about it through that lens before you said that, but now I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. Because I was thinking about like, what do they mean by relevant? Because truthfully, I was like, oh, so like if it's like in pop culture terms, like if it's not relevant, people don't like consume it, they don't care. And so then it just sits on a shelf and nobody gives a crap. But in terms of the creative process, it has to be relevant to the creator, or else they're not going to have the energy to exude or the mental capacity to even unpack it, because it's not interesting.
Right. Right, exactly. It's not interesting enough, or it's not relevant enough to them, or they just wouldn't have even thought of it maybe because it's not relevant to them. Yeah, I think it's actually, that's cool to think about, like how you're thinking about creativity. Are you thinking about it from the position of a consumer, or are you thinking about it from the position of an employer, because that also came to mind when you're talking about
Yes.
relevant versus and novel. It's sort of like, oh yeah, how do we capitalize on creativity? Because that is a whole thing. That's like a whole
Oh,
that's a
yeah.
whole world out there. Is like, how do you make your employees more creative, or how do you use creativity to you know, be the most productive in the workforce, in the, you know. And I don't mean to like totally, you know, diss that, because it's like, of course we're all in this world, and even if you're an artist, you're also kind of trying to figure out, you know, how to create things that people want and like. And so you're always sort of, I think maybe all of us are always thinking about it from all ends, but it is interesting to think about like the difference between it as a consumer versus on the creator side. And yeah,
Absolutely.
so many different pieces here.
Well, yeah, I guess to say like, so I was, while you're talking, I'm like, oh my God, yes. And because I remember learning about like how this has been, like how studies have helped workplaces and how they've used this information to make sure it keeps workers' intrinsic motivation up. So what's the environment? What's the like the components of the work environment that keep workers uh, intrinsically motivated enough to have a higher uh, what's the word, like productivity level. And so I was like, oh, so it's like the next thing I had in my notes was that creative ideas do not need to be a positive, life affirming, or good for mankind. They can also be applied to the opposite and have terrible consequences for mankind and for the planet.
Yay. Thanks. Thanks, creativity.
Yahoo.
Yeah.
So like, oh man. So the fact that you're sharing like, the relevance and working with like parents in the creative process, or like, so just to name that, like how we're really playing with creativity as a concept, most folks hear that word and assume we're talking about musicians, we're talking about writers, we're talking about, those in artistic fields. But they don't realize that, like, most people write it off and say, like, oh, no, 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 I'm not a creative person. That's for so and so, or so and so plays the piano, or so and so, whatever. That's not me. But what you're saying is the type of work you do is not only with folks like that, it's with folks in many different circumstances. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, so actually, as we were talking about this, like big picture sort of like ways that creativity is used for like mankind, with whether it's beneficial or not, I was thinking, oh yeah, there's like I have a very deep preference to work with like individuals in this like much more personal way, because I think that, yeah, it's like, whether it's like we think about creativity being like about like artists, like professional artists or musicians, it's like, I think in some ways I'm like, well, in my mind, if somebody's doing that professionally, they've already got some grasp of their creative process that's really working for them in some way.
Yeah.
And I think that I love working with people who don't necessarily identify that way as like an artist or as a writer or anything, whatever the medium is, right? Because it could be so many different things. Because I think that creativity is like something that we all have. And I think it's something that we can get easily cut off from if we're not like thinking about it, making space for it. Just in that there's not a lot of maybe permission or acknowledgement that like creativity exists in all these other realms as well. Like if you're in the creative, work, if you're doing creative work, then you already probably know this and like are surrounded by people who values creative process and are working towards that. But like, if you're not, and you're, just working your job and like but you've always kind of like dreamed about writing a novel, or if you've always kind of dreamed about like making art and you used to do that, but you don't anymore, you like kind of like let that fall by the wayside. Like I love the experience of kind of reinvigorating that in people, because it's something that is still there. It's still in you, and it's still wants space. I think I was actually thinking this before we got on, Kim, because I was writing down how I feel so strongly that creative process is also a transformational process. And so there's like a lot that can come up around that. Like when you're creating something, you're also transforming yourself in some way. And that can, of course, bring up this like resistance or lots of different feelings. But I was thinking, oh yeah, it's no wonder that we like, it's so common to kind of put something off, like to be like, oh yeah, I'll write my book someday or whatever. That's like such a common thing. I think it is. Like I feel like talking to people, they're like, I'm not a writer, but like, oh yeah, I do have this dream that I'll write a novel someday. It's so wild to me. Like I'm like, oh, that's amazing. So you are actually a writer, or you have this in you. It doesn't, it's not for just like specific people, but it does require that you give space to it. And I think that can be something that is hard to do, especially alone, especially if you don't have the support systems for it. Yeah, there's all sorts of reasons, but I just think it's so cool to actually find the ways in which like anyone can like make a little more space for their creativity and like see what that grows into, because actually that it's an ongoing process.
Yes.
And I think if we're looking at artists and people who are doing that professionally, I mean, first of all, not everyone who's like a professional artist is not feeling stuck, right? People can feel like they need to mix it up in any sort of way. So but usually those folks like have been doing something like this for a long time. So you have to start where you are.
Yeah. And I think that's the hardest part in any creative process, no matter who you are, whether you're well-versed in creative processes or you're not, is like, can I actually check in with where I am right now for real? Because we might have a narrative in our head that like, this is how I do it. Like this is how I do it. This is how this last experience went. And that's all I know to be true about like what I know I can do. I want to expand that in some way. So I'm just going to keep doing that and wait for that like non-repeating element to show up. And that's where the jumping off point is. But like, even in that process, there's all sorts of like, I mean, I can't help but think about, like you said, like you're giving up part of yourself to this transformative process of creativity, of whatever you're trying to express. You're giving up part of yourself. And in some way, shape, or form, that's a fear-inducing experience. That's a grief-laden experience, because I was this person before, but transformation means I'm not going to be that person anymore. And am I okay with that? Because that means I'm also giving this part of myself to the other, like whoever is going to experience this with me, or if it's like a piece of art, like someone's going to take it in. And then that means part of me lives in that now. Am I cool with that? Like there's so much in it. Ugh, that made me go, ugh.
Do you have, I'm so curious, I don't know if you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, but I'm so curious, like if you have something in particular for you that comes up, like do you have a medium that you work with? Is there some like, or where you experience this in yourself creatively?
Are you creative?
And I can talk about myself
right now.
It's happening right now. It's just where I want to go, but I was like, I don't know if that's something that's like okay to do on this podcast.
Fuck yeah. I mean, this is DVT in a nutshell. Or like follow the impulse, and if I'm like, oh, then you'd be like, okay, it wasn't where we go.
Or it's like, oh yeah, there's energy there.
I mean, like, okay, we'll go there. Okay, so my creative processes tend to fall in, I mean, I think historically, like when I'm going back to like childhood stuff, it's music.
Oh, cool.
Music and dance, because dance was the first creative thing that I was like 3 when I started dance classes. And my mom like threw me in dance classes. I was in like 7 dance classes a week. And so like dance was the first way I learned like how to express, but through the body.
Mhm.
But what I really loved about dance was the music that you got to move your body to.
Amazing.
And so I was like, okay, well, I want to move my body to music that makes sense to my body. And then I remember telling my mom, like, I'm going to be a rock star. And she's like, well, you should start music lessons then. So like, so that's how, and I think I went up to my choir teacher and said, I'd like to join the choir, but I was in the band. So like I was in the band and you weren't supposed to do both. And I was like, no, I'm going to do both. I'm going to sing and I'm going to play an instrument. Like that's how this is going to go. So I think like, because those were my initial like childhood places. And I have found like through like my own work in the last few years, the older I get, the more I need the processes I had as a child. And so it's music and dance, but music. Because dance was really about the music a lot. And dance was the expression of how the music made me feel.
Mm-hmm.
So like music and now as I've gotten older, writing. So it's all three of those like smushed together.
Do you still make music now?
Yeah. I do.
Cut to one of Kim's songs.
No. No way, Jose. But I will tell you, there's like, it's blurred, but there's a drum set right there.
Oh, amazing.
And there's two guitars back there.
Dude, you are a rock star. When you just shared that story, Kim, I was like, oh my God, I can totally see that. Just like little Kim being like, Mommy, I'm going to be a rock star. And I'm like, dude, you are. Of course. That makes so much sense for you.
Track. I mean, truthfully, I wanted
to really see it.
I wanted to be somebody like Cyndi Lauper. Like everybody, like I liked Madonna too, but Cyndi Lauper was like, well, I wanted to be Madonna too. I just wanted to be like that. And then like I started seeing like the eras of like how pop music changed, and I was like, oh no, I don't want to. But anyway, yeah. Okay,
but so there's still room for all of it, you know. Everyone's doing everything. Everyone's doing it all, you know.
Right? So, okay, I wanted to ask you the same. Reverse Uno. Go ahead. You answer.
Well, I was actually thinking about, when I asked you that question, I was thinking about fiction writing, because I studied fiction writing in undergrad. It will always have a place in my heart. I still am a fiction writer, and I actually lead fiction writing groups now, using this using drama therapy to help people get generating and like kind of like finding their blocks and like working around them, working through them. So I love this combination of things. And I was thinking, when I was asking you about that, I was thinking like about how in my writing process, I just like consistently have been amazed by and frustrated by the fact that almost every time I sit down to write, I feel dread. Yes, it's like always there. It's just always there. And it's something that I think is fascinating, because I'm like, oh, this is why, you know, people, and I should also preface this with saying, like, it's when I'm really working on projects that are important to me. It's when I'm working on things that I know I want to have out in the world. It's stories that I know, like, sort of very deeply in my imagination. When I sit down to free write, if I'm like in a free writing, you know, group, it's a different thing. I'm just like, blah, 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 word vomit. Like, that was pretty. I can read this to somebody. But, you know, and not to discount that, because sometimes really real things come out of those things too. And that's why we do it. But when you sit down and you know you're going to work towards something, there's dread. There's fear, there's avoidance, there's frustration, there's so many different things that come up that make it feel like almost impossible to do it. And I think that's why for so long I resented there's a kind of classic like writing advice that people will that writers will give to other writers, which is like, if you want to write, you need to write every day. And I, for so long, like, have resented that piece of advice, because I have felt like, how am I supposed to do this every day? Like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, this is like torture, you know? And second of all, I need some help from someone if I'm going to be sitting with these feelings every day. So, you know, this is why I'm doing this work now, is because I've sort of piecemealed my own support together through my own therapy process. Doing regular talk therapy has been so helpful to my creative process. Doing DBT training therapy was so helpful to my creative process. And I feel like, you know, I'm now in this position where I can give other people the support that I have really needed in the past. And still need, you know, and still have. So
relevance.
Relevance. Yep. Relevance.
Oh.
Look at that.
Oh. Oh my God. Okay. I had a question that, hold on, I'm looking through my notes. Please hold. Actually, that's where, I mean, what you're kind of talking about, because you're like, the feelings come up.
Yes. Yeah. So
That
we're gonna go into impasse. Yeah.
just, but like, I also don't want to like lose our discussion on creativity, and that's where my brain just got kind of like stuck, which is hilarious because it was like about impasse, and that gave me an impasse. So it's like shame begets shame, impasse begets impasse.
We're shame spiraling right now.
That's exactly what's happening. Fart.
Wait, what happened? Did something happen to make that happen, or was it just like trying to connect different pieces?
You're so good.
I love I'm doing it. We're doing it right now.
Yeah, we are.
But this is what's important. It's like, oh, what's happening in the transition, right? Like it's like juicy stuff usually.
That is a perfect segue to talking. The notes can sit there because we are here, friend.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay. So the concept of impasse in the creative process. So Marie has written a paper on impasse. So in order for us to graduate from our Developmental Training Institute, we have to write a final paper. We have to do a whole bunch of other stuff too. But for some reason, that paper is
it's a behemoth.
It's a behemoth. And so a friend of ours recommended that I read Marie's paper on impasse because I had been at my own place of like creative block. And so I reached out to Marie and said, like, Marie, I heard you wrote your final paper and that it's on impasse. May I read it? And gratefully, Marie said yes. And I read it and was like, oh my God. And so, like, can you talk to us about, so I guess I should say, no, I'm not going to say anything. How do you define impasse and what is its purpose in the creative process?
Oh God, can you define it? I want to hear your version of it first.
Okay. I look at, well, it's interesting because now I have like the neuroscience of creativity language stuck in my head.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Which is different than the DVT understanding of impasse.
Well, you know what? Okay, let's maybe even what just happened, right? Like because you'll probably hear it in this podcast too, which is
for sure.
I'm like, I like getting meta with it because I think then it's like even more, there's more energy around it because it's like, look, we all just experienced this thing. So we can just point to the thing we just experienced.
Yes.
Like, so in play and drama therapy, when you're doing a session, when you're in the middle of a play and then you're doing something really exciting or something really engaging, then something happens and then like the energy drops.
Yeah.
And this happens in conversations all the time. So we probably had a few actually at this point where it's just like, we're talking, we're like trying to get in the flow, we're trying to get in the, kind of like jam together.
Yep.
And like sometimes you're in the flow and then sometimes you're not and you're still moving, but then sometimes also the energy drops, so you're kind of like, okay, wait, what was I thinking?
Mm-hmm.
What was I just about to say? Or something you said made me think something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's like a pause. It makes like things kind of like slow down or stop altogether in some way. And I mean, I just actually, the more I do with creative process, and especially since writing that paper, that was like such a huge thing to work through in myself, because I was talking also about my own creative my own experience in training therapy and the things that I was kind of working through in that. And Impasse was a big part of it. And for so long, I had a lot of shame around this experience of impasse. And I think that's actually quite common, because I think when something's flowing and then something stops, there can be like a tendency to be like, wait, did I do that? Or like, what happened? Like, this is a problem, right? To see it as like something went wrong, or like, why couldn't we keep a good thing going, you know, forever?
Yes.
And now I like thinking about it actually as like a in conversation kind of thing is makes it a little bit easier for me, because I love talking to people, and it's like, oh yeah, of course, like there are moments where this like drop happens, but often I think in those moments there's like a return to the inside of us or somewhere else, like our mind goes somewhere else and we're like trying to make sense of something. And this happens like in like any kind of creative flow too, where you're doing something and it's really working, and then all of a sudden you hit like a snag, and it's like, wait, like, and so many different feelings can come up. You can be like, I'm done. you can be like, okay, great, that's the end of it, you know, or like you could be like, I'm so frustrated, or, you know, have like a lot of shame come in and be like, I didn't do this right. You know, there can be grief about it. Because you lost something, you know, in losing that flow. So I am fascinated by this because I have experienced a lot of it, and I have always held a lot of attention around it, and also I think it's a natural part of this kind of process that we are all engaged in all the time. But I think also culturally we don't make a lot of space for it as having any value. And I think it has so much value. I think it's like a gold mine basically of like what's happening here and how can we like look at this differently. And I think like, you know, we live in a culture that's so like go forward all the time. But actually if we like kind of notice the like places where there's like an energy dip, or like there's like a pause, or like, wait, we have to go backwards, we have to like find something that we forgot. There's so much more richness, I think, to the process of just living and creating and everything that we do, you know.
Oh my God, you've said so much that makes every synapse in my brain fire. Like I think about the reasons for impasse, but I also think about like how, like your question of like, how do I define it? I think historically, because of DBT training, my go-to answer was it's the drop in energy. It's losing interest in something. But I didn't really actually ask myself, like, losing interest, like, what does that mean to me? And then assigning a value to it. Like if I'm leading a group and there's an impasse within the group and I was the leader, I would assign a value of, like you said, like I've done something wrong as the leader, and therefore the group didn't know where to go next. And so that's on me. I should have given them more scaffolding. I fucked up. Crap. Okay, let's go back to the beginning and rebuild it again. And it wasn't until I read your paper that I was like, wait, the value of rest, the value of giving yourself permission to be like, wait, because like there's a beautiful article written about impasse that came long before us about death as impasse, or impasse as death. And so it was like the death of something before the new thing was reborn. And so that's kind of how I envisioned impasse to be. But then when you like, and that's in terms of DBT, but I would also like own the value of it. Like, okay, well, I did bad.
Yeah. We did the bad death thing.
The bad death. Now I have to invigorate you with life and zombie,
Yeah.
and oftentimes like in a group, like if that's our association to what like an impasse is, then the imagery that comes up in the play is then like, okay, zombies are now, we're playing with zombies, or we're playing with a different version 2.0, because that's what we're all kind of like stuck with, what we think impasse is.
Right.
But when I read your paper and you were like, no, what if impasse is actually a part of the process, not the end of one and the beginning of another, but it is one huge thing. And I have to honor it with the same reverence I do as every other step in that process.
Yeah.
To then say like, okay, then that would mean just as important as that beginning for a DVT group, a sound and movement that starts our like language of what the group is.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have to honor the language of the silence too, because it's serving a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Because what will be emerging from that will be more congruent with where that human is in that moment and where they want to go. But they have, like, I think like for me, I'm a highly sensitive person, which means my depth of processing, it is deep. And that my processing goes so deep that sometimes I am a slow motion mover, especially in groups. And it doesn't have to be a DVT group. It could be like a group chat. It could be a group out for a night on the town and everybody's in conversation. They have already, because it's a group, people are like firing off, boo, choo, 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 choo. And I'm like, that thing you just talked about like 10 minutes ago is blowing my fucking mind.
You're like, I'm still thinking about it. Can we have like a little sidebar and talk about it for an hour?
Yes, because like I want like the nitty gritty, like, okay, you said this word and what does that mean to you? And how does it feel in your body? And oh my God, like, but like, what does it mean to you? Because that is the emergence of like, how do I find you and how do I build the bridge to you? Because I'm going to bring to that conversation what I define that as. And like, that's why I think I start the podcast off with like, tell me who you are and let's define what we're talking about. Because like, I don't know what creativity means to Marie today. I might have known what it meant to you a month ago.
Yeah.
But you're a different human than you were a month ago. And so am I. So like, because of, circumstances that we're all every day going through in our lives. So like, you're still consistently Marie and you're not Marie that from before, you're new Marie, like same. So like, I want to know. And so I think when it comes to impasse, sometimes it's that like, I am moving at a different pace and you're not, and we don't know how to find each other and it takes a minute. Sometimes it's like whatever you said brought up a feeling for me and I have a different relationship to that feeling. Like, or okay, like let's take grief.
Yes, exactly. Right.
So like talking to somebody about grief and early on in my grief process, those first couple years, anytime somebody mentioned anything about loss, I was like, we're in it, dude. Oh my God. And then I'd immediately like leave mentally for a second, think about my mom, think about my friends that died. And I'd be like, and have to try to like walk my way back to the present moment. Now we're coming up on 5 years since my mom has died. I can sit with I've done enough work on my grief to work with other people in their grief. I won't completely go away. But if I'm in a creative process and somebody's like, okay, or whatever it is, a creative process, and it like grief enters the picture and enters the chat, or loss enters the chat, I'm going to check out for a second. I'm going to dissociate. And that is the impasse. And the other's like, where did you go? And that happens in relationships, I think, where people are like, yo, I was talking to you. Are you even listening to me?
Yeah.
And then they get upset because they feel unheard. And you're like, but I just you said the thing that makes me go to the place or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love that, Kim. Wow. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that in, because that actually is so powerful and so relevant to what we're talking about. Because I was actually just thinking about when you were talking about the groups, like doing a group and having this experience of like this kind of like death process of like, oh, we were doing a thing and now we're not now. And although like, if you're a leader, you're like assigning this like thing of like, I did something wrong, but something about the experience of that drop, I was also thinking about how that can happen with ruptures. Like it could happen like for so many different reasons and at any kind of time. But when you're talking about grief, I was thinking, yeah, there's so much about we don't know. Actually, there's like a not knowing, and that the impasse sort of puts us in touch with. Because if you're engaged in a process, or you're engaged in play or a conversation with someone, you kind of know where you are, and you're like jamming and like figuring out where each other are, and there's like feedback, and you're adjusting as you go. But there's something about like an impasse that really puts us in touch with like, oh, we don't know what comes next.
Ever.
And we don't even know what's happening inside the other person, and they might not even know what's happening inside themselves.
Yep.
So this like unknowing, this like not knowing, and how we relate to that.
Yeah.
And grief, I mean, yeah, what a powerful topic, right? Like death and having lost people that we love. There is so much not knowing in that.
So much. Well, every day is like wait, I don't know how to do this without the person, or I don't know how to do that without the person. Like every day it's like a new discovery.
Yeah.
For a while, for the first few years.
Yep. You're kind of, you also have this experience of like being very intimately engaged in your own impasse process.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, because this is a podcast about identity, it's kind of like in your experiences and like how you've like navigated your life. How does impasse and creativity, because they're very different concepts, impasse is a part of creativity, but like, how do they show up for you in your experiences and who you are?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's so funny. I feel like when we were talking about getting ready for this podcast too, and or for this episode, and we were talking about impasse, and you were like, well, you're like an expert on impasse, right? And I was like, oh God, am I? I mean, we've already discussed that we're not experts, but there is like this thing where something that has been part of your experience for so long, will sort of follow you. And like, I have that with impasse. I actually didn't even have the language. I will say like the word impasse is kind of new to me. I mean, new in that I think I wasn't familiar with it really until I started DBT training, because there was a word for it in the process.
Yeah.
But I had experienced impasse forever, and yeah, and my first thought, like, so yeah, there's this very mixed relationship that I have with this thing that I've been building a relationship to over time, and have all these like struggle experiences with, and actually also very quite painful experiences with. And so it's like, even now, like I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess it is part of my identity. I mean, I don't know if identity, that's like a strong word.
I think strong. Yeah. Experience.
It's definitely part of my experience. Yeah. It's definitely been part of my experience, and continues to be, though I do think my relationship to it now is much better and different than it used to be. And the thing I was going to say was, I sort of talked about this before, but I mean, even when I started DBT training, when I experienced impasse in the play, that actually was one of the first experiences I ever had of being in the play space, which again, I'll just like reiterate that I think I see this like play process as being so parallel to so many other processes, and part of what I love so much about it and love using it with people with creative process. So this is like, not just to talk about DBT, but like as like a metaphor for other life processes that I've had too.
Yeah.
Which is that one of my first experiences of DBT, but I think what's so cool about DBT is like it's embodied. So you're really in it really quickly, right? You're like, I'm in my body, other people are in their bodies, and like we're doing something, but it's not clear really exactly what it is, or it becomes clear over time. It's like the storytelling process. And the first ever experience I had of playing, I was in a group, and I very quickly became sort of immobilized in my body because I was so overwhelmed with all the activity that was going on, and I didn't know what to do or where I was, and I sort of checked out and like ended up in a corner, like on like crouching on the floor, sort of hiding from the rest of the group, like being like, I don't know if I'm part of this. This is crazy, you know. um, and I just like it sticks in my memory because I had so much like confusion, shame, like curiosity,
Yes.
like fascination with this thing that was happening that I couldn't understand and didn't know why or what it was. But I was like, okay, this is making me feel a lot of things. I'm gonna probably pursue this. Which is such a funny response to something that was so weird, you know?
That was my response too.
And then, you know, and then I like went on to study DBT and for the next few years. And it was like, so I think like that's like one thing I can point to where I was like, oh, it became very clear in that moment to me. And I can think about this for so many other things too, where it's like the thing that's hard, the thing that I can't quite figure out, but I really want to figure out. That's where all the energy is. And maybe in that moment, because I'm fighting or like really trying to figure it out and I can't quite untie the pieces that are all like knotted together and there's different threads, but like I don't know what's separate from each other. It's not flowing necessarily, but there's so much there that has so much potential to get like pieced out and unlocked and unraveled, and then you can see like this whole picture that's like actually about all these other things. And so it's sort of like I don't know what to compare it to. Like I was trying to find another kind of, but maybe that's just it. It's like this like tangle. It's a knot, and that's where the like we talk about this in play, but sometimes we follow where the energy is. And that doesn't mean where you like or it doesn't just mean what is giving you pleasure or what feels like it's flowing.
Right.
Sometimes it means what's like, oh, this is complicated. This has a lot of stuff in there, but it's all tied together and we don't quite know how to make sense of it yet.
Yes.
And I think
it's the energy.
Yeah, it's the energy. And that it's like where is there like, yeah, and I don't even want to call it a block necessarily. It just feels like a knot of things. It feels like there's a lot of things tied up together.
I mean, honestly, that makes me think about like then where impasse happens. Because I think about in play therapy when I'm working with a kid, like if a kid is playing with something and they're like in it and all of a sudden they like, whoop, forget it. Or they don't say forget it. They just up and switch.
Yeah, they just go. Yeah.
Like as a play therapist, we're meant to notice like what was the kid doing right before that happened and what were they playing with? Like thematically speaking, because that likely has a tie to like, did we get too close to the material that they're actually like, because like so much of like in this work that we're talking about, the creative process and play for children, there's like there's a through line there, and we're playing in the world of metaphor, we're playing in the world of imagery, we're playing in the world of analogy, but like we're still playing with what's at the core of that. Like we might be still in a metaphor, but the metaphor is only the like layer on top of what the experience, the feeling, the memory, the whatever is. And it like our nervous systems don't know the difference between lived, yes, I'm living this right now in reality, or I'm playing in this imaginal way. The nervous system just knows I'm doing the thing. So it's still going to have the benefits of like, you know, whatever it is. But like, if we think about the role of impasse, then like the thing that that's an impasse in a play therapy session is the kid going like, oh, I'm going to go play with the bricks now. And it's like, you know, there's like cardboard brick things. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, so we're using something very tangible and like building something to create, like bring down the anxiety, because like the ambiguity of playing in a imaginal way with these characters was so thematically close to what your lived experience is. We got too close. Now we need to contain, we need to structure, we need to whatever. But like, again, like metaphor, like that's in a child's play therapy session. We're doing this all the time in conversation. Like if we hit an impasse, it's like, oh, did we got close to a feeling or an experience that maybe the two of us don't want to wrestle with right now because it's whatever.
Mhm.
Or like, I haven't done my work on it, you have, and so like we don't know how to negotiate that, and so we just go and then like somebody says, oh, how about the weather, huh? It's been snowing a lot lately.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about how fiction writing does the same thing, because it's, you know, fiction writing is like you're making a world. It could be anything. So it's
Yes.
all metaphor in a lot of ways for whatever you're thinking about, living, experiencing.
Yep.
But I was just thinking about how there also can be this feeling of like, oh, like, you know, that's avoidance, or like if you're like, oh, hit this thing, like I gotta go over here now, like how we can kind of say, well, and then now that's not the right thing to do. But actually, I think maybe the goal isn't even necessarily, and I'm not saying this is what you were saying, but it's making me think about how I've thought about it in the past. And I was thinking the goal might not even be to stay with the hard thing all the time, but to know the process, right? Because we can be like, we'll hit a sensitive point in the conversation and be like, okay, actually the weather, and we can do that and not even realize that we're doing it. But I think what's so juicy is like, if you can do it and you can switch to the weather, and then but know that that's what you're doing, and know that that's what you have as like a out, you know. And that could also show up in your creative process, whatever you're doing, to just know like, oh yeah, when I hit this thing, I do this other thing, and that's part of my, and then maybe I actually need some space to look at it from over here and not be right next to it, but to be like, yeah, the weather. Speaking
Yes.
of the weather, you know, that reminds me of this other thing, you know. It's like kind of like giving yourself the right distance, or like allowing yourself to play with that too, like
Yes.
with the coping, with all the patterns that exist in you.
Yes. Can I introduce a concept to you and then get your
Yes.
thoughts about it? Okay.
Yes, I would love that.
So I've gone down the pathway of the neuroscience of creativity, and in one of the resources that I'm utilizing, they mentioned there's like, you know how they love to have these like catch things so you learn and remember things. They said there's 4 P's of the creative process, or for creativity rather. But the thing I should also point out that I hadn't really put a lot of thought about, I say creativity in my world, and I'm often thinking about artistically, and then also like, what is the creativity of how I live my days? Like, how do I choose like what I'm wearing, or what's my morning ritual, or all of those things? But then also like, how do I create a playlist I want to listen to, or whatever? Like, I think about it in lots of ways, but the indicators of being able to recognize an instance of creativity in the like research of creativity. I found this like, I don't know why I didn't think about it in this terms. They said there's like the problem solving science logic creativity. So they're studying like problem solving and like how we utilize like essentially non-repeating elements, and what factors need to be there for somebody to create something new that will be helpful for people. Then there's the artistic domains, which is the way I always viewed creativity, was like, you know, the arts of art, music, dance, literature, fashion, all of those things, theater. But it's really the sum of all of it that is like all of creativity. And I was like, oh yeah, because we're using the science, the logic, the problem solving of creativity when we're trying to create. We just don't like lean into it.
Yeah, we are problem solving.
Yeah.
I don't know if we talk about that very much though, in when we talk about like artistic creativity, but it is problem solving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's so much discernment in that process too, of
Yes.
like, what am I what am I trying to say? How do I wish to say it?
Yeah.
And when I do create something and I look at it, then I'm like, well, does this exactly say what I want to say, how I want to say it, or do I want to change it in some way, shape, or form? But that's all. It's like there's like the process, and then there's these little processes, like little.
Yeah.
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 But okay, so I was reading about the 4 P's of creativity. So there's process, the creative process, the product, the person, and the place. So when it comes to the person, they say the creative, the person is the definition is the person generating the creative idea or acts. So that would include their personality, their intellect, their temperament, their physique, their traits, their habits, their attitudes, their self-concept, their value systems, their defense mechanisms, and their behavior.
Whoo, that's a lot more than a P.
It's a lot more. Well, that's all within person.
Yeah.
And I was like, but wouldn't you also consider culture? Wouldn't you also consider like so much more?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So I'm going through these because there's a part that I was like, oh, Marie and I got to talk about this. Product is obviously like when an idea becomes embodied into like the tangible form of what someone's trying to express. That's the product. Now, here's the one that I was like, oh. So process, product, person, place. This is place, but they did like a diagonal place/press. And I was like, what's that mean? So really it's 5 P's. They lied. Pressures. The factor.
Ooh.
That's why I was like, we got to talk about this.
I like it. Why do I like it so much? God.
This is why you do what you do.
That's so annoying.
So they're the
That's
factors.
Great.
It's not annoying at all. And if it is, we are the most annoying mofos on the planet. This is like where I'm interested in. That's why we're sitting here talking about it. Like it's so interesting to me.
Yeah.
So the factors that are present in an individual's place, situation, or environment that influence their capacity to be creative. So like, interestingly, there's research on all of the, well, I'll go through the 4th one and then I'll tell you the other piece. The 4th stage is process, which is what we've been talking a lot about today. It's the study of like, what underlies creative thought, the motivation, perception, the thinking, the learning, and the communicating, what we're doing to create. It involves the intricacies of the creative mind. The process approach readily aligns itself to the neuroscientific perspective. So it's easy to study it because you're like looking at the different parts of the brain. All of these have like all 4 or 5 rather, but really 4 areas have significant research. This is when I was talking about how do you get empirical research in creativity. Some of these have like trajectories of like research that are like well established. Empirical research is there. Can you guess which one doesn't have as much empirical research?
Is it pressure?
Yes.
Wow, that's actually fascinating though, because I feel like it would be so possible to study. And
right?
It's so obvious.
Right?
Like, people talk about this all the time. Wow, I'm really curious. That's so interesting. I wasn't sure if I was going to be right when I guessed that.
100%.
Because I also have heard so much about, I was just thinking when you were saying pressures, I was thinking about, oh yeah, there's this whole thing about the ideal pressure, right? You can have too much pressure. You can also have too little pressure,
yes,
which I think is counterintuitive sometimes.
Yes.
But yeah, there's people talk about this.
Well, because like what you're alluding to is like the idea of flow, which then kind of like leads us to like optimal performance. Mm-hmm. So that's true in like performing arts, mental health, like to have that, like, you got to be a little anxious, like a little bit in order to like do the thing, but you also can't like pass the threshold or you're not going to be able to remember like what chord you're playing.
Yes.
And then you're checked out and then you're noticing the person in front of you, like singing lyrics that you're like, wait, there's lyrics to this song? Like you're just gone. How do you help your folks identify like what they need in order to access different parts of themselves and their creativity.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is where we want to go, but I feel like the thing that's coming to mind, which I think is relevant for a lot of people, is just like the amount of stress in your everyday life and how it hampers or motivates you
Yeah.
to do something new or do something creative.
Mhm.
And I think there's such a balance between, because also there's the pressures, but then there's also the structures that you have to implement these things. Like if you're, I don't know, what's a good example? Well, I can use myself because this is what I was just thinking about, but my different experiences I've had just as I've gone on my own career trajectory. It was making me think about when I was working, so shortly after I left CIS, when I was in DBT training, I was working also as a counselor in the Alameda foster care system and working with kids 0 to 21 who had been removed from their home or was changing placement in the foster care system. And it was a super high stress, I would say, like trauma filled environment. It was also an amazing workplace filled with really incredible, caring people. And I learned so much doing that work. And also, I remember I was there for 2.5 to 3 years. And over the course of that period, I remember like towards the end of it feeling like, wow, I just don't have the same space in my life anymore for my own creative stuff. Like I used to paint, I used to write a lot. And then like when I started that job, I was so on all the time. Like my nervous system was just like so on all the time when I was working that I would come home and, also work weird shifts and stuff like that were like up until midnight or, I would work swing shift. So also getting weird sleep. And I was just thinking about that because I was thinking like, no matter who you are, no matter what your job looks like, you can be in a position where you're giving so much of yourself to something that is also not leaving space for other things or so yeah, I think about that is related to this like pressure conversation. And I also think about like, I don't know, like parents, like moms who are like giving so much of themselves to their kids and also working and just that it can be really hard to actually carve out time and space for letting yourself be creative when there's all this other stuff that you have to do,
Yeah.
And I think that could be true for anyone. We can all get stuck in that trap. Like I don't have children and I can get stuck in this like kind of like, oh, well, instead of sitting down to write, I'm going to go do the laundry or whatever,
Yeah.
But so I don't know, I don't know if I'm still on topic, but it's like, there's like, I'm thinking about structures and pressure as being sort of like, together, but they are like these separate pieces of it.
Yeah. There's so much in what you're saying in different ways throughout our whole conversation today that I'm hearing like the importance of giving ourselves permission for space. Like
Yes.
space
Yes.
feels
Yes.
huge.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And part of that is eliminating pressures. If you feel over pressured in some way,
Right.
it's sort of like, yeah, like what kind of space is it actual time or is it like energetic space? Because both are true. There's like psychic space.
Uh-huh.
There's
Yeah.
time. There's physical space. if
Right.
you don't have a place to go to do something.
I mean, I think about writing a final DVT paper, maybe. Like, like right before we recorded this, I was speaking with Chris, and she was like, "Write your paper," and I was like, "Gotta go record a podcast. Bye."
I'll be over here talking about creativity. That's amazing.
Yeah. But like, hold on, I need to laugh about that because that is really funny. The fun of impact. I think it's funny and fun. But like the part that I've been stuck on writing in my paper, where I've been like, I was in flow, like when I finally got to the place, because the topic is about grief and also deconstructing developmental transformations concepts in my lived life, in the experience of grief. But I couldn't start writing that paper because I was too underdistanced. I was too absorbed in it. I was too in it for the first 2 years of my grief experience. And then I said, like, well, now I've got energy. I want to get up and I want to go out and do things, and I'll write about that. And so I found writing about that early part initially very difficult, but then once I got into it, I was able to do it. Writing about the second part, when I went out and did it, was like, hey, this isn't that bad. Keep going. When I got to the part that was the hard, like, how am I like digesting this? And what does this mean? And what am I trying to tell you about like what I'm learning about myself and others in the world? Impasse. So under distance, because what I had learned was such a brand new concept to me. I did not have structures in place to be able to articulate it, first of all, for myself, let alone to someone else about what it is. So I think about the role of like under-distanced, over-distance. Like if I'm too over-distanced, there's not going to be any connectivity to what I'm saying. It's going to sound like jargon. It's going to sound like bullshit. And I don't want that. But if it's over-distanced. If it's under-distanced, I'm going to be a heaping pile of blah, blah, blah. Which I think when I was in DVT training initially, like when you described like your first group that you were in, that I had a very similar experience. I was like, I'm not used to people relating to me in this way. And I want it so badly. And I'm so drawn to it. And it terrifies the hell out of me. And so I am shutting down internally and I do not know how to relate to you. But I knew I wanted to go back. I knew I wanted to like find my way there. But like that process of trying to figure out like what is happening for me so that I can find you was not only present in the DVT experience, but in this like creative process of writing for me as well. I mean, there's so many parallels because I think like we can talk about DVT.
Yes.
This is this like most people won't know what it is. And we talk like kind of not tangentially, ambiguously. And they'll be like, I still don't get what it is. And I'm kind of like, it doesn't matter because it's literally like shows up in everything else in our lives. But like, especially the creative process and writing.
Well, what you're talking about reminds me of like this. It sounds like what you're saying is like that these patterns that come up in relationship. You can tell me if this is what you're saying or not.
Yeah.
But this is something I think about a lot. So I think it's connected where these patterns that come up in relationship where you want to be seen, but you also are scared of that. The same thing can happen when you're writing just by yourself about anything, but especially about something that is about you, that you are working through, because it's like, it is a relationship. I think it feels true to me that when you're creating something, you're actually relating to yourself and you're also relating to something else. I mean, I feel like there's this other, this other piece that's sort of like mystery and the world and your psyche and everything that's unconscious in you and all this
and
stuff.
the world.
You know, there's a lot that's outside of us. There's a lot that's bigger than us. And I think you're relating to that, even if you're alone, you're relating and you're creating something, you're relating to the energy of the day, you're relating to your feelings, you're relating to, so all of that is happening. And so the same kind of patterns can come out because it's also relational.
Yeah. So it's, yes, intrapersonal versus interpersonal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I since we've been in training together, I've gone totally down the Jungian path. So like it makes me think of like the collective unconscious of like we're creating our own, we have our own experience, but then we're also tied to this larger humanity experience that like we're kind of tapping into in so many different ways. But it's also so ambiguous because it's like, well, what do you mean the collective unconscious? But it's like what you're saying.
Do you feel like, when you're, I mean, you can also detour us if you don't want to go here, but I'm curious about like this like paper writing thing. It's like, do you have a specific, it's like a specific, well, it's like a certain part that makes it feel like, and you're like, okay, no, I don't want to, it makes me think of when I sit down to write and I feel dread. Like, is that a similar, are you having a similar feeling or experience around it?
Yes. And like, because I'm that slow processor, I have to get figured out like, wait, what are the important parts for me?
Totally. Yeah.
But then it's like, well, it's kind of like counterintuitive because like, well, if you write about it, you're going to find the important.
Right. I know. And you're like, maybe I don't want to know. Maybe I don't want to know what's important. Totally. Or you feel like you have to know already, right? To sit down and write. Right. I think that actually is so, I feel like, I bet so many people can relate to what you just said. It's like, I feel like I have to know what is going to come out of me before I sit down to do the thing.
Yeah.
Right? This is a block that happens in play all the time because people are like, wait, you want me to move my body without knowing what I'm doing? Are you kidding me? It actually is like people have this response where they're like, no. Like, no, thank you. Actually, I'm gone. Or like, you want me to draw something without knowing what it's gonna look like? No, like you don't want to see that. People have this response where they're like, no, you don't want it. That's gonna be fugly. Like,
you will be harmed by the ugliness of my drawing.
Yeah. But yes, but then you are cutting yourself off also from the experience of surprising yourself or of confirming your worst nightmare and realizing that it's actually not that bad. Nobody was really harmed by your stick figure drawing. It was maybe even kind of cute.
It's got a little like smiley face. Like,
yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. So one other concept I wanted to run by you and get your thoughts on, because it felt very like creative processy. And then I want to talk, we'll bring our conversation to a close. Okay. So are you familiar with Graham Wallace?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Some dude, he's named Graham, came up with like a 4-stage of creative process thing. And it made me think, when I read it, it made me think of you. And I was like, stole from Marie. Okay, first stage is the preparation. Super conscious. We're trying to figure out what do we want to do, like whether it's a problem or a creative act. Second stage is incubation. Unconscious process. Engagement with the problem is at hand, but we don't take any effort. And it's directed towards any effort directed towards the problem because we need a period of rest.
Oh my God, that's so good. That's so good.
Right?
Yes.
And I was like, oh, that just confirms like Marie stamp of approval because like you're so like the period of rest is like the second stage because
I love that. I love that it's early on because I think sometimes I think of it as being later down the line when it's like, oh, and then I got stuck and then I gave up or I didn't want to do it, but it's actually like, what if you gave it its own, I love it second. I love that it's second.
Great. it made me think of like when we've had previous conversations and you talked to me about your final paper writing and you were like, I had to like walk away from it.
Yes.
Like I had my job that I went to. It wasn't the job that you just spoke about. It was a different
No, it's
one.
a different job. Yep.
Very different energy. And you just put yourself in that environment for a while. And as you continued on, you gave yourself again more space, energetically, psychically, whatever, to then create what you ended up creating. And I was like, this is Marie. I got really excited when I read it.
Oh, I love that. That's so fun, Kim. No, it's so real. And actually was talking about it is making me think, oh, actually, yeah, because sometimes actually if I were to track it, I mean, and I'm not saying there's not necessarily this like map that fits all.
Right.
But I do think sometimes impasse happens right after I realize that I need to do something new. And I've in the past thought, oh man, am I really just giving up because it's too hard to think about doing something new? But the truth is that sometimes I need time to consider this new thing before I act on it or do anything with it or have the juice to give it time and space. And so, yeah, that makes sense that I like that as a second step.
I love it.
That you could intentionally give yourself too, that you could actually be like, I'm going to have an idea. And instead of going to work on that immediately, I'm going to now not like sort of subconsciously think about it for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Or a month or however long it takes, you get to decide.
It makes me think of like the folks, let's say they're an artist and they're like a painter and they're trying to create a specific type of painting and it's just not going the way they want. Like they're coached, whether painting or it could be any other direction, but some folks are coached to be like, okay, drop the painting for now and go do some music. Go make some music. How's the music going to inform your painting? Or vice versa, being the artist or the musician that's like, okay, well, I can't write, I can't finish this song. I can't figure out what the bridge is. And it's like, okay, well, why don't you go paint for a while or go write a fictional short story?
Yeah, totally. Yes. Yeah. Do something else while you're percolating on this other thing. I love that. Yeah.
I love it. The other two stages, illumination. So it's marked by the solution consciously emerging, fully formed in one's mind as a sudden flash of insight. So I think about the role of insight.
I love that. Yeah. Right? Yes. Oh, struck by lightning.
Yeah. It's like, does that?
It jump out of bed.
Yeah. It doesn't always look like that. But there is this like deeper, like, oh, things feel like they're starting to like form. I'm starting to be able to like, I don't know. This is my movement for it.
Yeah. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, how often when you're working with people do you experience people having that like flat lightning bolt of
I do have it. And I was just going to say, actually, I think it's so cool because what we're talking about is helping me also just remember the things that I feel like I've been learning about how the way you treat impasse or relate to that stage can do everything for what comes next.
Yes.
Right? So like if you literally think about, because we were just talking about how there's like a germination. What was it called? What was the stage called that you were?
The incubation?
Incubation. Okay, so like it's like an egg. I think about the metaphor of a seed a lot. That was in my paper.
Yeah, it was.
Like this germination stage, like you plant a seed in the ground, it's underground. You can't see it and you don't know what's going on down there. But I could be so frustrated with that fact that I like then rip up the earth, right? And like destroy everything, or I'd never come back to it. I like abandon it. There's so many different ways I could relate to it. I'm thinking of ways that I used to relate to this experience. It's like, okay, seed in the ground, all destructive. Like I don't want anything to do with it.
Mhm.
But there's another way to relate to it, which is to say, seed in the ground. Okay, like, this is part of this thing, and I want this thing to grow. I'm going to keep watering it. I have to have faith
Oof.
that something's happening, even if I
Oof.
don't see the tangible results of it. And then when it does sprout, because it will, I think it will. I think if you give the space, the time and space for something, it might not look the way you thought it would.
Right.
There's a lot to be said for things not going according to how we planned them, but
Truth.
then that's the inspiration. It's like, oh, it's fully formed. There's like, it's not fully grown yet. You have to do a lot of work to keep like doing it, but like it's a thing. It's a tangible thing, you know?
Yeah.
And if I didn't come back to it, I wouldn't see it.
Mhm.
If I had like destroyed it, it might not happen. So there's like how you relate to the incubation stage feels like it kind of lays the groundwork for what comes after.
Yeah. I mean, just that last part of what you're saying too makes me think, like, depending on which choice you make, what you end up telling yourself about your capacity and your
Yes.
capabilities
Yes.
and what you believe the creative process to be around that thing.
Yeah.
Those are three very different trajectories.
Yeah.
You tear it up and like destroy it.
Right.
I would imagine there's probably a shame spiral. I shouldn't
Yeah.
have the shoulds and shouldn't show up.
Yes,
I shouldn't
totally.
have done it. Oh my God, now I've really fucked it up. I don't know what to do
Yeah.
now. Now I have to
Yeah.
start all over again. Oh God, I don't have the energy anymore.
Right, right, right.
Like that self-defeating, self-limiting
Yes.
stuff.
Yes.
If you walk away from, okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was just gonna chime in because I was thinking you made me think of a whole other alternative, which is like to be like you during that incubation phase, you're like your negative self-talk comes in, right? And you're like,
Bingo.
I'm not doing this right. This is not good. It's not working. And in that process, if the seed then comes out of the ground, you might downplay it also. You might be like,
sure.
oh, this thing happened, but like
Whatever,
you know? But then it's like, that's your inspiration. You keep going with that. Like that's the thing you wanted, but it's like it's so crushed by this other thing, right? That happens.
I think people do that a lot in their lives when they're like, I wish for this thing, I wish for this thing, I wish for this thing. And they get so caught up in the trajectory of the wish, like the process of wishing, that they don't actually realize that like whatever they wished for actually manifested. And I don't mean in the like hippy dippy manifest. I mean like it happens, but they're so focused on the trajectory of what the future could look like. They're now already on another dream.
On another thing. Yeah, totally.
So I mean, like, yeah. So they can't take in that they like, oh no, like, but you wished so hard for that and here it's arrived. And like you said, it might not look exactly as you thought.
Right.
But most of the time it doesn't. But can you sit with what this is? Like, this is you did this. Like it's a big deal. But no, okay, we're gonna look at the far the distance. Got it. But like, yeah.
But okay, yes. So I guess I just was gonna say that does happen. I do see clients having that experience, and I think it's like, and also that experience of being so far future oriented is also so relatable. Like to get stuck there, to feel like you have to problem solve out here in order to do the thing right here is like, but so to, I think we need help. We need help sometimes, like containing that or having a process or structure to explore that and someone else to like help us stay on track with what the thing is,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other piece is like if you get up and walk away, you might tell yourself I wasn't capable.
Uh-huh, exactly. Yeah, totally. I think that happens all the time. It's like, oh, I walked to it. I used to do that too. I mean, I'm saying this like I've worked through all of this. I'm still in process with all of
I
this all
just
the
went there in
time.
my head. I was like, oh shit.
It's really, it's it's an ongoing practice.
Mhm.
Um, but it's good because I think it's good to remind ourselves of these things. It's like, oh yeah, if I walk away, then I walked away, and I might have a story about what happened, but I, we need to give ourselves the chance to have these successes and see what comes out of them.
Yep.
Um,
That the last stage of the 4-stage creative process from
yeah.
Wallace. So the last stage is verification. So that's involving the conscious deliberation and working out the details of whatever the solution is or the creative like product will be.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But man, when I got to the incubation, I was like, I gotta talk to Marie about this.
Incubation.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
I mean, we could go down a whole nother pathway of like how like rest is like the definition of rest and well, not definition, but the value of rest and how it's devalued. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but as far as the creative process goes, how do you work with folks around like leaning in and then leaning out? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, it happens very naturally. Because I mean, DBT, I think this is why I use DBT as such a tool in my work, but just the way I work in general and what I really love to do with people is to have like an emergent process. So sometimes people are surprised by that. They're like, oh, I thought we were going to come in here and like get this, and this done and like, and then be out on my way.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, well, I actually, we can do that. And we could, make goals to check off our list to do. And I think what can be really interesting is to hold those goals in mind and see where we are right now with them. And often I will say almost every time, I can't think of a time that this hasn't happened, but we'll address what is coming up in the moment and figure something out about how that's connected to these other things. And something about that, I just have to say, this is a mystery to me still, but it's so and like it's so engaging and so exciting to me. So I keep doing it with people. It's like what's so exciting is like that giving that space and making room for us to explore and then making those connections can like basically unlock all this energy to then make someone feel like I've had people tell me like, wow, after our session, I just like went and did all the things I needed to do because I was so energized by everything we had talked about. And like, I just had all these different ideas. Like, it's what we were talking about, this inspiration that happens. So they were just like, I had all these ideas that were related to all this stuff. And then like, I didn't stop writing for an hour or whatever, So I can't remember now your original question, but
Me neither, because I'm fascinated by this.
that's how yeah, I can't remember exactly what you asked something about how I work, and that's like with this emergent process of what's coming up right now, because I actually think it's so practical. It seems maybe on the outside from our like logistical brains that it's not the practical thing to do, but in my experience, it is usually the most practical thing for me to do.
Because we're so embedded in the patterns of our lives. So like in so many different ways, in so many different layers, that it's going to show. If most people want to avoid the present moment, and so you're literally saying, like, you want to work on all these things. They're here. They're here in the room with us. Like,
Yes,
right
exactly. They're here right now. Like, when you want to talk to them right now.
right.
Yeah.
And I think that is the hardest. I find that the hardest sell to someone who's not familiar with this kind of stuff. You're like, it seems like we're just going way left field and trying this like rando thing. But you're actually saying, no, like, I took everything that you said. And also, I want to pull in, like, can I find you?
Mm-hmm.
There you are. Oh, look, all those things that you said, they're kind of like, they're here.
Mm-hmm.
But like, we have to find it together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to look, again, it's not going to look how you think it's going to look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might surprise you. There might be things, I think there might be pieces that you forgot about or didn't realize were connected, or you didn't realize you were having this feeling about this thing that's impacting the way that you've been working on it, you know?
Love this. Love this.
Yeah.
What have we not talked about creativity that you want to make sure we talk about today?
No, I think we talked about a lot of things that are really, that I like talking about. I don't know that I have one. I don't have an agenda. I appreciate all the things that we have talked about.
I love it. If people want to talk to you about creativity or Impasse or the type of work that you do, or they want to work with you, where can they find you?
They can find me through my website, which is mariecbroadway.com.
Booyah.
Yeah.
Marie, thank you for coming on the Identity
Yes,
Podcast.
thank you, Kim. Thanks for having me. This was so fun to jam with you on all this stuff. I'm like, oh, just like every time we're just like opening doors, looking to see what's in there. It's great.
We're so curious. We're like curious little, I don't know, this movement, curious little creatures. Every time I get to talk to you, you just make my brain go. Okay. All right, everybody. Yes. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time.